1690. An English sailor named John Strong is ordered to sail to Chile and dig up a sunken Spanish treasure ship. Simple job. Instead, the wind grabs his boat, drags it hundreds of miles off course, and dumps him beside two islands nobody was looking for. He steps ashore and finds them cold, wet, gray, and utterly miserable. In other words, exactly like home. He scribbles them onto a map, names a stretch of water after his boss, and sails away. That's it. That's the entire reason we're here. Because 300 years later, those same soggy rocks would drag Britain and Argentina into a real shooting war. Welcome to the Falklands, or, if you prefer, the Malvinas. Even the name is an argument. Nobody actually lived here. No natives, no towns, just birds, seals, and wind that never shuts up. So Europeans did what Europeans do. They moved in. In 1764, the French turned up, built a little colony, and named it the Malouines after their home port of Saint-Malo. Malouines, run through a Spanish accent, becomes Malvinas. So every time Argentina says Malvinas today, they're technically speaking a little French. 1 year later, the British landed on a different island in the same group and built their own colony. Completely unaware the French were right over the hill. 2 settlements, 2 flags, 1 tiny archipelago, each side convinced they'd discovered it first. Awkward. Then Spain showed up, absolutely furious. See, a couple of centuries earlier, the Pope had taken a map of the whole planet and drawn one line down it. Everything on this side, Portugal. Everything on that side, Spain. And wouldn't you know it, these islands landed on Spain's side. So Spain marched over to the French and said, "Pope, line, map, our island, kindly leave." And the French, who were old friends with Spain and crucially were offered cash, happily packed up. Though on the way out, still bitter about losing the 7 Years' War, they leaned in and whispered, "Whatever you do, don't let those filthy English keep the other half." So Spain strolled over to the English settlement and gave the same speech. Pope, line, map, Spain's island. And the English said, "Yeah, no, this one's ours." There was, however, one small detail. Spain had brought more guns, so Spain threw them off anyway. England, outraged, threatened war. Spain got nervous and called France. "Things are heating up, you in?" And the French war minister said, "Absolutely, let's invade England itself and party like it's 1066. At which point, King Louis XV replied, 1, you are insane. 2, you are fired. Sorry, Spain, no war today. So Spain sighed and handed the settlement back. Still our island, they muttered. Nope, said England, ours. Then some colonists over in North America started getting rowdy about tea and taxes, and Britain suddenly had much bigger problems. So they abandoned the Falklands to deal with that. But being British, they refused to leave quietly. On the way out, they nailed up a plaque that basically read, "This is still completely our island, don't touch. No people, no soldiers, just a metal sign flapping in the wind, at the bottom of the world." Remember that plaque. It's about to become the most important piece of scrap metal in the whole story. So the island sat in Spanish hands, quietly, for years, until a certain French guy showed up and ruined everything. No, not that French guy, that one. Napoleon rolled into Spain, kicked out the king, and grabbed the whole country. And while Spain was busy being conquered, its colonies across South America saw their chance and bolted for independence. Suddenly, Spain had a continent-sized crisis and precisely zero attention to spare for some sheeprocks in the Atlantic. So it left too. And for a couple of decades, the Falklands belonged to nobody at all. Just penguins, a few fishermen, and some gauchos who were basically cowboys, but cooler and Spanish. Then a merchant from Hamburg heard something interesting. Thousands of wild cattle were roaming the islands, free for the taking. To him, that didn't look like cattle, it looked like money. His name was Luis Vernet, and he was clever about it. Before setting up shop, he got permission from Buenos Aires, capital of the newly independent Argentina, and just to be safe, from the British too. Covering all his bases, for a while business was good, and then some American ships turned up to hunt whales and seals in his waters, and Vernet's good mood evaporated. Vernet asked Buenos Aires for soldiers. Buenos Aires said, "Nah, do it yourself." Handed him some guns, named him governor, and wished him luck. So Vernet seized the American ships and arrested their crews. 2 things then happened, fast. First, America sailed down and said, "Nice little settlement you've got there, shame if something happened to it," and then they destroyed it. Second, Britain noticed that Argentina had appointed a governor, which meant Argentina was officially claiming the islands. So a British warship arrived and asked very politely, "Didn't you see our plaque?" And because, say it with me, they had more guns, they threw the Argentines off. And just like that, the Falklands were British. And British they stayed. For the next 100 years, almost nothing happened. They became an official crown colony in 1840. Port Stanley became the capital. Somebody worked out the cattle weren't paying enough, so in 1851 they shipped in sheep from Britain. And the islands filled up with far, far more sheep than people. 2 world wars came and went out at sea. The islanders grew up British, spoke English, farmed their sheep, and were perfectly happy. But 8,000 miles away, one thing never changed. Argentina never, for a single year, stopped insisting the islands were stolen. Las Malvinas son Argentinas. The Malvinas are Argentine. It was in their school books, on their maps, in their bones. Fast forward to 1976. After years of chaos, a brutal military dictatorship seizes Argentina, propped up by the United States as a wall against communism. They gave it a lovely, boring name, the National Reorganization Process, while quietly making thousands of their own people disappear. And by 1981, this man was in charge, General Leopoldo Galtieri. His problem? The economy was in freefall, inflation was insane, and the crowds outside were starting to chant his name in a way he really did not like. Now, if you ever find yourself the struggling dictator of a struggling country, here's a tip. Test it across the centuries and print it in bold. Start a war to distract everyone from how miserable they are. And Galtieri had the perfect war just sitting there, glowing on every schoolroom map. Take back the Malvinas, and every Argentine, left, right, rich, poor, would love him overnight. Better yet, Britain looked like it couldn't be bothered. It was cutting its navy and had pulled its one patrol ship out of the area. Surely, the generals reasoned, Britain wouldn't cross the whole planet to fight over some sheep. So on the 2nd of April, 1982, they went for it. After grabbing the nearly empty island of South Georgia as a warm-up, 600 Argentine troops stormed the Falklands. Defending them was a tiny handful of Royal Marines who put up a brief, doomed fight before the governor told them to surrender rather than die for nothing. Within hours, the Argentine flag flew over Stanley. Back home, the streets exploded. The exact same crowds that had been screaming for Galtieri's head were suddenly weeping with joy and waving flags. Overnight, the hated general was a national hero. The generals figured that was the end of it. It was not, because they'd forgotten to check who was running Britain. Running Britain was this woman, Margaret Thatcher. You could love her or hate her, but nobody argued about one thing. She was tough. Like metal. Iron, for instance. The generals had bet she'd grumble, sigh, and let the islands go. They bet very, very wrong. Thatcher drew an exclusion zone around the Falklands and assembled a task force of over 100 ships to sail south. The world got nervous. The United Nations tutted. Every country in South America except Chile backed Argentina. And the United States, which had helped put those generals in power, sent Reagan to gently ask, couldn't you just, let them have the islands? Thatcher said no. Reagan said, okay, here, have some weapons. Fighting a war 8,000 miles from home is a nightmare. Britain didn't have enough ships, so it borrowed some, including a cruise liner, the SS Canberra, and used tiny Ascension Island as a pit stop halfway down. By the time the fleet arrived in May, the Argentines had dug in and were waiting. Step 1 for Britain, control the sea. On the 2nd of May, the submarine HMS Conqueror put 2 torpedoes into the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano. She went down with 323 men, the single deadliest moment of the war, and a bitterly controversial one because she was sailing outside the exclusion zone at the time. The message, though, was received. The entire Argentine Navy turned around, went home, and stayed there. That left the air, and here Argentina hit back hard. Their pilots, screaming in low over the water, were terrifyingly good. Days after the Belgrano, 2 jets streaked in and sank the destroyer HMS Sheffield with a single Exocet missile. For weeks, Argentine aircraft hammered Argentina, but it wasn't enough. On the 21st of May, British troops landed at San Carlos, survived wave after wave of air attacks, and clawed out a beachhead. Then they marched. Across freezing, roadless, boggy ground, they fought their way toward Stanley. At Goose Green, badly outnumbered British paratroopers ground out a 14-hour battle and forced 900 Argentines to surrender. Then, one dark hill at a time, they took the mountains ringing the capital. Surrounded, shelled from the sea, and freezing, the Argentine forces gave up. On the 14th of June, 1982, it was over. 74 days, around 900 dead, most of them young men, over islands where almost nobody had ever wanted to live. And here's the twist the generals never saw coming. The war they started to save themselves is exactly what destroyed them. Within a year, the dictatorship collapsed and democracy returned to Argentina. The islands stayed British. In 2013, the islanders were finally asked in a proper vote whether they wanted to stay British, and 99.8% said yes. Out of everyone, 3 people voted no. Argentina still claims them today. Then oil was found nearby, which means nobody is letting go anytime soon. 2 windswept rocks. French, then Spanish, then Argentine, then British. Because land doesn't start wars, memory does. And out there, the wind still hasn't stopped. Neither, it turns out, has the argument.